Welcome back to the Temple Daily Telegram Sports Podcast. This is Josh, back with Greg, Marcus, and Daniel. And just because a bunch of our area teams are off tonight, enjoying their bye weeks, we are not off. Hardly are we ever off. But I'm looking forward to another great night of area high school football. We're going to talk Temple. We're going to talk Belton. We're going to talk about what's going on in Cameron and the Yeoman. And we're going to hit a couple other area games that are happening tonight. But first, I'm going to throw it over to Daniel once again. He's going to break down some of our stat leaders from Week 5.
Yeah, we got some more great stats from this past week. A lot of guys putting up some strong numbers, so let's dive on into it. Rushing, the guy that's going to lead it week in and week out. That's Rosebud Lots, Jacorian Johnson. He had 19 carries, 245 yards, and 4 touchdowns. Then you're going to go over to a Bruceville Eddie, quarterback DJ Weaver. He can sling the rock, but in this game he threw it. 15 carries, 168 yards, 4 touchdowns. Moving on over to Salado for the 5-0 Eagles. Trey Shepard, 28 carries, 223 yards, 3 touchdowns. And then over in Rockdale, the dual-threat quarterback Tori Lachlan, 11 carries, 153 yards, and 3 touchdowns. All 3 of those coming in the second half. I was there last week. It was a really good game. Then you got Weston Hugo for the Holland Hornets, 10 carries, 109 yards, 4 touchdowns. And just because there were so many great rushers last week, we're going to go ahead with a couple of extra. Academy's Jonathan Rouse, he had 19 carries for 110 yards, 2 touchdowns. Good to see him back after overcoming a couple of injuries. And then to wrap it up, we got Temple's Anthony Jackson, 4 carries, but he made them count for 95 yards and a touchdown. So moving on, now we're going to the quarterbacks, the passing leaders from Week 5. You got Rockdale's Tori Lachlan again, 16 of 24, 196 yards and a touchdown. Going to Cameron Yo, you got Zach Andrus, 25 of 28, only missed 3 passes for 319 yards and 3 touchdowns. You got TJ Rumfield over at Temple, 15 of 21, 148 yards and 3 scores. You got DJ Weaver out of Bruceville Eddie, not to be confused with his brother. 8 of 18, 161 yards and the touchdown. And then finally you got Buckholtz's Victor Baez, 9 of 25, 130 yards and 3 scores. So the recipients of those passing yards, you got Bruceville Eddie's Blake Weaver, 3 of 71. Rockdale's Tyler Lemkule, I'm probably mispronouncing that, but he was 5 for 68 yards. Cameron Yo's Iverson Westbrook, 9 of 94 for 2 touchdowns. That guy does it all over in Cameron. Then Temple's Xavier Johnson, 3 for 45 for a couple of scores. And then Jaquaylin Crawford didn't have a big game, but he's a big name around here. He was 5 catches for 37 yards, so he was used early and often. So we'll see how Rockdale wants to use him this week against Academy. And hopefully we'll have some more standouts, and as always, we'll have them here for you next week. So if for nothing else, be sure to get your area stat leaders on every week for the podcast.
Well, that was Week 5, and we are about to jump into Week 6. As I said before, there are a bunch of teams not playing tonight. Undefeated Gatesville and undefeated Salado, both off. Rogers, Holland, Moody, Rosebud Lott, Granger, Central Texas Christian, also off this week. But still a bunch happening, and we're going to start right here in town, in Temple, where the Wildcats are going to be hosting College Station A&M Consolidated, unbeaten A&M Consolidated, and a pretty familiar coach to the area as well.
That's right. A&M Consolidated, coming into town with that 5-0 record, 1-0 in district, and this is actually, the only matchup in District 18-5A of, unbeaten teams in district, with Temple being 3-2 and getting its district off to a nice start last week. A pretty easy 56-3 win up at Waco University. I mean, that's a result that Temple obviously needed, but also expected. That's the 4th straight year they've really handled University without any problem, and of course, that is a team on a 41-game losing streak, so Temple doesn't really gain any ground with that win. That's a win that all of the good teams in the district should pick up, so that's just one to get through and move on. But it's interesting. A&M Consolidated, brought a 4-0 record in the district, and then really had to fight to beat Waco 35-31 in the district opener in College Station last week. The Tigers were actually down by 3 points late in that game, and they had a sophomore backup quarterback named Gage Paul that led a 75-yard drive and threw a 30-yard touchdown pass. Not sure quite how much time was left, but it was definitely in the final few minutes of that game, and that did lift A&M Consolidated to the 4-point home win. And so that was definitely a test for them. They survived. The reason that quarterback Paul was in the game was the starter, Caden Fedora, who's a junior, very talented kid and definitely a dual-threat quarterback. He apparently got his ankle rolled up on early in that game on the first series and tried to give it a go and come back, but he apparently watched the second half wearing a boot on the sideline, and they had to rely on this sophomore, Gage Paul, and he actually threw 4 touchdown passes and ran for the 5th touchdown, so he handled himself pretty nicely. I was talking to Lee Fedora, the Consolidated coach, this week, and as of Wednesday, he was saying that Caden Fedora, who is his nephew, apparently there was a lot of Fedora brothers in the College Station area, and this one's not Lee's son, and he's not Larry's son, the coach at North Carolina, so he's the son of another Fedora brother. Anyway, he said Caden Fedora will pretty much be a game-time decision on Friday night of whether he plays. They said he's just going to have to go through the whole week of practice and get out on the field and test it, and if the ankle's good, he'll go, and if not, Gage Ball will be in there for his second straight game with a lot of work.
I mean, does that change anything of what Temple's doing in practice to prepare for something like that, or is it really just kind of Temple's defense just trying to get better?
Well, I think for one thing, Scott Stewart, the Temple coach, said, he said all reports out of College Station, I guess he's got some sources or some people with binoculars up in tall trees or, on top of tall buildings looking at Consol practice. But he said all reports are that Caden Fedora's moving around, jogging around in practice. So he's expecting to see him. He kind of joked. He's like, I don't want any kid to get hurt permanently, but I sure wouldn't mind if he takes a week off. Because he knows how good the kid is. He's put up some big numbers in those 4 games that he did start and play. I think the sophomore kid, he obviously throws well, and he can run a little bit. So I think Consolidated will still do pretty much the same things, and therefore Temple's defense will do the same. But obviously there's a reason why Fedora is the starter, and you would think if he's 75 or 80% at least, he'll be the guy. So one thing that's interesting, if people watched the Temple Consolidated game last year, which Temple won 34-20 on the road. The quarterback for the Tigers that night was Cade Williams, who was a very athletic, quick player. Maybe not a great thrower, but definitely a nice runner and an athlete. When Lee Fedora got the job in the offseason, he apparently had scouted Consolidated pretty well last season, and he thought, that kid, I need to move him to slot receiver because he's quick, good hands, he can make things happen. So he came in. The coach's nephew became the starting quarterback. They moved Cade Williams to a slot receiver, and he has about 400 yards of receiving, and apparently he's getting recruited a lot at that position. So he's a kid to keep your eye out on if you go to the game. And they've got a couple of running backs who are up around 250 yards. They have a kind of a slew of receivers. And then another thing, if you go to the other side of the ball, there's a couple of really good linebackers in this game. You've got Monto President Jr. for Temple. 53 tackles. He's just been around the ball all season. In his first year at linebacker, he moved from safety and hasn't skipped a beat. He's really a good player, and he's just a junior, so watch out for him. And then on the Consolidated side, you've got middle linebacker Trevor Williams, who I think was up around 140 tackles last season. He already has 75 stops in 5 games this year, so you do the math. 15 a game. He's around the ball, and he's Colby Peel is a safety for Consolidated. He's a 3-year starter, committed, verbal commitment to Oklahoma State. So they've got some talent. They've got a 300-pound guy right in the middle of their defensive line who's really good. And this is a team that went 3 rounds deep in the Division II playoffs last year. So, obviously Temple went 6 rounds, but you've got 2 really good teams here. And I think a lot of football fans will be interested to see what a Lee Fedora coach team looks like, because they remember him from Rogers. But, hey, it's been 15 years since he coached a game in Rogers. He had great success there and obviously did great things at Navasota, winning 2 state championships. And he kind of left there because of a contractual snafu, I guess, by the school board, and he felt kind of slighted. And he might have ended up at Consolidated anyway, though, this year, even if that had not happened, because this being his alma mater probably was his kind of dream job to come back to Consolidated where he played for Ross Rogers. So anyway, it's this matchup has got a lot of neat layers to it, and I think it should be a great game.
2 teams that have won their openers. They're 1-0 in district. Belton also 1-0 in district after a 49-28 victory last Thursday, against Harker Heights in a game in which Belton outscored the Knights 22-0 after halftime in the rain. Belton can go 2-0 in district for the first time in a little while. The last 3 years, I know before their bye, I should say, they've been 1-2, 1-2, and 1-1, and they have a bye next week. So for them to have a chance this week against Killeen to go 2-0 in district before that bye would be huge for the Tigers, with Midway coming up after the bye. Last week, the defense for Belton forced 7 turnovers. I don't think I've been at a game where a defense has done that. It was 4 fumbles and 3 interceptions, I believe. And the Tigers have now forced 17 turnovers this season, which speaks volumes for what they've been able to do to revamp that defense. And 11 of those 17 have been interceptions. And again, for fans of Belton who have watched this team over the last few years, that secondary has always been kind of an Achilles heel. Big plays over the top, kind of spoiling other positive efforts. And this year, that secondary has stepped up pretty big and has been pretty stingy against some of these teams. Now, they haven't really seen a heavily passing team since they played Temple in the opener, but still, I mean, they've made some progress and they've been making some plays when they've needed to.
I was going to say, when you look at Belton, the 3-2 record and 1-0 in district, that looks fine. I mean, that's right where Temple is at too. If you really go back and look, I mean, this is a Belton team that led Temple by 14 points, I think, about halfway through the third quarter, and before Temple came back to win that game by a touchdown. And then, Belton obviously had a great chance to beat Pflugerville Hendrickson and lost on a touchdown with 20 seconds left, 10 seconds left. So, Belton could easily be 4-1 right now, even 5-0 if things had worked out right. So this is a team that is showing a lot of potential, and that Midway game looms pretty large right now.
Yeah, and what they've done is gotten better in areas each week. They've kind of been able to, they learned from those first 2 losses, and over these last 3 wins in a row, they've gotten better each week at doing certain things. Specifically, Connor Carruthers at quarterback. I mean, here's a guy who, he was going to get some playing time regardless, with, behind starting quarterback Cameron Davis. But once Davis got hurt, I mean, Carruthers was thrown right into there. And, it took him a little bit of time, a game and a half really, to kind of get his feet underneath him. But since then, he's done really well. He threw 2 interceptions in his first start, hasn't thrown an interception since. I think Belton's only had maybe 2 or 3 turnovers since that second game against Hendrickson. And if they can continue to win these turnover battles, I mean, that's going to bode well for them going forward. With Killeen, Colleen's 2-2, and one of their wins was via forfeit. Stony Point had to forfeit a victory from earlier in the season, and that was handed over to Killeen. This is Killeen's district opener. And so, the Kangaroos with Coach Neil Searcy, they're obviously looking to get off on the right foot in district, and especially coming off a 56-9 loss to Belton last season, in which Garrison Vaughn, the safety, had 4 interceptions. He picked off Marcellus Johnson 4 times, and Johnson is back as Killeen's quarterback, looking pretty good this year as well, and he's got a weapon outside with receiver Montego McElvaney, who's looked pretty sharp early on for Killeen as well. So those 2 guys should provide quite a challenge for that Belton secondary that I was talking about a while back. But speaking of challenges, Cameron Yo is hosting Franklin tonight. And this is a tough one for the Yeomen. Now, Franklin is a good team, but tough meaning that Cameron Yo needs to get things together and quickly, I think, just to kind of calm some of those nerves out there. They've lost 4 in a row, albeit, pretty close games, but they've lost 4 in a row. So this one looms pretty large for them.
Yeah, it does. I'm sure there's a lot of people in Cameron that are kind of panicking right now, and with good cause. I mean, this is not a Cameron Yo team that we're used to seeing here. One of the things, kind of opposite of Belton, is Cameron Yo's giving the ball up a lot, and another 4 turnovers last week against McGregor, and that's been one of their big problems this year. One of those interceptions, Cameron had the ball just outside their own goal line, and Zach Andrus threw a pass that was a little bit high to his receiver. It was tipped and intercepted, ran back 100 yards for a touchdown for McGregor, getting them on the board first. And if that continues against, well, really anybody, but if it continues this week, they're going to have a really tough time against a Franklin team that, last few years have been right in the playoff mix. And, it's tough to just pinpoint the interceptions, the turnovers for Cameron is their biggest problem. I mean, last week against McGregor, they were getting beat up front. Their offensive line was not really, they couldn't really just pound the ball with their running backs. Their offensive line wasn't creating too many holes. And Franklin's the type of team, they're going to they like to play a few more defensive backs and maybe just that one linebacker up front, which will be an interesting test for Cameron to see if they can actually be able to pound the ball just facing one linebacker and see what they can do. But Franklin's probably going to see what Zach Andrus can do with his arm and test some of those good wide receivers like Iverson Westbrook, see what's there. And on the other end of it, Franklin, they love that little the wing tee type offense, get to the line, get set, wait that required 1 second, snap the ball and go. Kind of misdirection. And that could play right into Cameron's defensive plans too, because the one thing that Cameron does have this year is a good linebacker core. And they're not gonna give up too many yards. Gave up a couple of big plays to McGregor, but all in all, if you're just an offense that relies on a 3-yard run here and there, Cameron's going to stuff that all night long. I think it's going to be an interesting test. Franklin's got a big running back, Clayton Rossman, who's 6'0", 205 pounds, and they kind of mix that up with the speed back, who's only 5'10", 155 pounds, but Rossman's going to go right at you, challenge you, make you tackle him. He'll pick up those 3 yards easy just because he can carry the smaller guys on him. So it'll be an interesting matchup. And, yeah, if Cameron doesn't win this one and they're looking at 0-2 in district and 1-5 overall, I mean, that would be Cameron's first 5-loss regular season in over a decade, I believe. So,
thing just kind of shows you how things change. I mean, this is a team that for the last 8 years, I guess, 10 years, they've been able to almost have a one-up on their opponents out of nowhere. They've been able to kind of figure things out on the fly or in practice or whatever, just the way they game plan, and things have fallen into place. They have obviously talented players, but they've just had this extra thing. And on this year's team, they haven't been able to kind of find that yet. You can't always rely on just tradition and what's on their helmet and what's on their jerseys, or they have to kind of figure this out for themselves. I mean, the pass isn't going to help them right now.
Right. We were talking about that very thing in the press box, watching them against McGregor. It has been in the past where they've been able to figure things out in the second half, and we kind of figured, it's going to happen again. They're going to turn it on and kind of make the second half theirs, and they came out, played a better second half, but McGregor was just one up on them, and that's kind of what made the difference. And yeah, for now, like you mentioned, the past few years, the Yeomen are used to being playoff bound, state title games kind of in their head. The Yeomen fans are like that, and right now, they just got to be thinking about let's win a game, not thinking about let's get to the playoffs, let's win a few rounds. Let's just win a game right now, and it kind of changes your whole mindset if you're in Cameron. So we'll see.
Yeah, tonight's a good opportunity for this group of yeomen to kind of start putting their stamp on this season. It would be a good statement win to kind of let everyone know that they're going to get this thing on track. Well, that game in 10-3A Division One is just one of three going on tonight. The other couple, Rockdale and Academy, and Troy and Gerald. Gerald's traveling to Troy tonight, and Daniel, you're going to be at that one.
Yeah, I'll be there tonight. Couple of interesting storylines with this one. Both teams not really doing so hot to start the season. Gerald comes into this one 0-5. They dropped their district opener to Academy last week at home in a 20-14 decision. And then Troy not doing a whole lot better. They're 1-4, but last week they dropped their district opener, at Franklin 41-10. And both teams really are just looking for anything to kind of build on at this point. You're past your non-district slate. You're into where the games count, and for both teams, it really doesn't help that they're competing in probably the toughest district in the state. You got your Cameron Yos, which we've just talked about. They're having an off year, but I mean they're still capable of being Cameron Yo at any point. And then you got Franklin and Rockdale. So, I mean, it's a tough district. Nothing ever comes easy out of there, out of 10-3A. But, neither team so far this year has put up a ton of offense. The most points either team has put up this year was, it looks like, Troy's 34-28 loss at home to Robinson. That was an overtime game. It was a really good game. I was there, and Robinson jumped out early. They led in the first quarter. I think they took a lead into halftime. And then Troy just kind of looking for any kind of spark. They got things going on the first play of the second half with a 75-yard touchdown run by their quarterback, Chance Mosley, to kind of get things going. And then they had a couple of deep balls there in the final few minutes to tie the game and send it into overtime. So really good game. A costly interception in that one ended up being the difference maker. So, again, both teams are just kind of looking for anything to build on. Troy is riding a 3-game losing streak. They won in week 2, 19-14 at Marlin, versus Marlin at home. But since then, they've lost their last 3. And, in week 4, they got hammered by China Spring. But again, it's, China Spring, 56-3. But you'd have to imagine they would want to, put up somewhat of a better score in that, you don't want to take a loss like that at home. And then last week, 41-10 at Franklin. That's not the way you want to open up districts. So we'll see who wants it more, obviously. I mean, I believe Troy has more offensive weapons. They've got running back Sam Jones. He takes the bulk of their snaps at running back, so he produces for them. They've also got Zach Erchbach at running back. And then, interesting enough, they've got probably one of the best kickers in the area, and Anthony Avila. He's really solid. In fact, last week he hit a 50-yarder for the Trojans last week, so that's pretty notable. And then for Gerald, some of their notable guys, they've got running back Alex Bravo. He'll run the ball the majority of the time. You got quarterback Aaron Rodriguez, and then wide receiver TJ Sykes, some guys to keep an eye on. So I would say the expectations for Gerald this season weren't real high, but you would still hope to have a better than an 0-5, 0-1 start. But Troy needs this win badly. They were really hoping to compete for that final spot in the district to make the playoffs again. They felt confident that they had the team to be able to do that. But you got to imagine a 1-4, 0-1 start isn't what they were hoping for. Now, obviously, there's still a lot of time left. You got a lot of time left in district to make something happen. But if Gerald wins and Troy ends up losing, Troy drops to 0-2, and then you've still got to play the Cameron Yos and the Rockdales. You got Franklin out of the way, but I mean, still, you got a ton of other teams. Academy is not a rollover team, and then you've got McGregor, which is, they're solid too. So Troy, being at home, Troy really needs this win. Again, just to build off of. That way, you balance out at 1-1, you pick up your second win, and hopefully something happens. But again, both teams not doing a whole lot of good right now at this point. So I don't know, whoever gets the win, maybe that'll be the start of the kind of reversing the trend. So we'll see what happens out there in Troy.
Yeah, the dreaded 0-2 start in district definitely puts you behind the 8 ball, and both of these teams are facing that possibility going into that one. Just makes it all the more important to come out on top. A couple other games on tap tonight. District 12 3A Division II, Bruceville Eddy at Buffalo. Both of those teams won their district openers last week. Buffalo is actually undefeated, so that's a big test for Bruceville Eddy on the road. Some non-district games: Bartlett against Kennedy at a neutral site in Lockhart. Bartlett still looking for that first victory, and then we have a couple 6-man games as well. Buckholz at Round Rock Christian, and Holy Trinity Catholic hosting Fredericksburg Heritage. I'm going to go ahead and open it up. This is the free forum time. If anyone has any thoughts. It looks like I have a couple hands up already. I'm passing it to Marcus.
I was just curious if you had mentioned the Rockdale Academy game. If we had talked about that at all, because that's the other game in this district that we've already hit on that should be another interesting one. And I don't know if you had mentioned it or gone over it.
Well, as a matter of fact, I did mention it, though we did kind of brush over it. Obviously, that is another big one. Both of those teams won their district openers as well last week. Rockdale on the road. Oh, that's right. Rockdale was a non-district game. They played Rogers, which almost feels like a district game since they're kind of right in the same area. But Rockdale on the road this week to play Academy, which got their must-win game out of the way, beating Gerald. Anyone have any thoughts on that one?
Well, I thought that was a pretty good performance by Rockdale on the road to beat Rogers. Non-district finale for Rockdale. Had the open week in district, but they filled it with the non-district game. And Rogers have been playing some really good football. I mean, they've been really playing great defense, and Rockdale goes in there and puts up 34 points, and they obviously benefited from Jaqueline Crawford being back in the lineup. This is the Oklahoma commitment, kind of do-it-all player who missed the first several games with a shoulder injury, I believe. So just having him back in there, obviously adds a dimension to the Tigers lineup, and then obviously their defense played really well too to hold Rogers to 6 points. And this is a tough matchup for Academy, I think, because Rockdale has the ability to put up a lot of points with Torrey Lachlan, the dual threat quarterback. Now he has Jaqueline Crawford as a weapon, and Academy has been a team that, despite 3-2 record, not bad. They did get past Gerald 20-14 in the district opener, but Academy struggled to score all season long, and a lot of moving parts on that offense. They've had to slide guys around because of injuries and just trying to find a spark. So this will be a tough challenge for Academy. It is a bonus that they're at home, so maybe that'll help them, but they're going to have to come up with some kind of offensive game plan that will work against a good team like Rockdale. And it looks like Academy ran the ball well last week with several different kids to offset a passing game that's really struggled. So that could be a good game, but I think you'd have to side with Rockdale starting to show some pretty good form with the Battle of the Bell only 2 weeks away in Cameron, Texas.
Yeah, and like you mentioned, Greg, Academy did have a couple of good rushers. Like I talked about earlier, Jonathan Rouse went over 100 yards. Trayton Bates ended with 98 yards and a touchdown. So the ground game was working for him. But last week I was at that Rockdale-Rogers game, and in that especially in that second half, Rockdale's quarterback Torrey Lachlan, he really was for no other way to describe it. He was really a man among boys in that second half. I think he started off that third quarter. He single-handedly had 3 rushing touchdowns in that quarter that really separated what was a semi-close game and really kind of broke it up. But before that, the past couple of weeks I had a chance to cover Rogers. So that defense really was as advertised. I mean, they really had been playing well. It was a stingy defense. They had a bunch of interceptions, really did a good job of limiting teams in what was, I believe, a 3-game winning streak before last week. So they really relied on that defense. So to see Rockdale kind of bounce back after a rough start to the season and play to the potential everyone thought that they were going to be this year. It was really good to see that. Again, like you talked about, having Crawford back makes all the difference in the world. And not a whole lot of people are talking about this, but that defensive line for the Tigers really played well. They had the size and the strength advantage, but at the same time, they really did a lot to disrupt the offense for Rogers. And then the other side, the offensive line did a great job of protecting Lachlan, and opened up a bunch of holes for their running game. So Rockdale really shining in that game against a tough Rogers team. So it'll be interesting to see, again, how Rockdale does against Academy. But if they can keep playing at the level that they did last week against Rogers, they're going to be that tough 10-3A team that everyone thought they were going to be coming into the season.
Good stuff. I think I'm going to close the phone lines. Wrap this thing up. One final note. Saturday, number 1 UMHB at number 5 Hardin-Simmons in a rivalry game in the American Southwest Conference. A big one there. We'll have full coverage of that, obviously. Pick up a newspaper. It's good for you. Specifically, pick up the Temple Daily Telegram and read our sports section. And then when you're done with that, read the rest of it. We got Athlete of the Week in today's paper and every Friday paper. Check it out.